Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 27, Alma 30 and 31, The Virtue of the Word of God. Dean Sessions has been a dear friend of Rod Meldrum's for several decades, and they worked together on the Universal Model. Dean Sessions is the founder and author of the Universal Model and founder of Millennial Science Foundation. There are 3 volumes to the Universal Model: the Earth System, Living System, and Universe System. All 3 volumes will contain a total of 32 chapters with more than 2,000 pages, and there are thousands of journal article references and photos from around the world. Dean especially shares some beautiful insights into the spiritual side of science. Dean and his wife Danette are the parents of 5 children and 10 grandchildren, all of whom have participated in this wonderful journey, discovering how nature works and why we're such an important part of the beauty that surrounds us.
Welcome, everybody, to our next Come Follow Me Gospel Doctrine supplemental study materials that we are doing. I am so excited about this today. We have a dear friend of mine. We have been friends since I think probably the pre-existence, actually.
That's definitely so.
We have with us Dean Sessions here.
Great to be
and
here.
Everybody, we're going to be talking about today Alma chapter 30 and 31, but we're primarily going to be talking mostly about chapter 30, which is an amazing treatise on Antichrist.
It's a dialogue with
Korihor and Alma. And we want to talk about some things there. So I hope you're ready to buckle up, because this is going to be quite an amazing. And I think we're going to have a good conversation here.
Yeah, definitely.
Because in order for us to be able to thwart the fiery darts of the adversary, we need to understand first off who are and what are Antichrist doctrines. And what can we do about them? So I want to introduce a little bit of how I met Dean. I'm going to go to our other screen here for just a second. This is some years ago, I had a company called High Country Gourmet, and we manufactured these dehydrated soup mixes. This is some of our offices here. And then this is the canning line. We had a fully automated canning facility here. And we were doing work for a number of the different food storage companies around the country, and also manufacturing dehydrated soup mixes for all kinds of different natural food stores and even grocery stores. So we were just very busy. This was when everything was just put in and so forth there. This is my kids actually working there, cleaning up a little bit after one of the shifts there. That child labor, glad this was a long time ago. No, but anyway, but then the food storage industry, this was in 1999 and the beginning of 2000, and all of a sudden, the food storage industry just completely went away, and I found myself with all these different companies that we were supplying to all going basically out of business, and leaving us hanging with about $750,000 in accounts receivable we could not collect. Anyway, so we were in the process of getting going through just horrendous times, and trying to sell everything off and close down the business. We had 30-something employees we had to lay off and so forth. It was just it was one of these horrible times, and I was wondering about asking myself, well, why? I mean, we were trying to help people to prepare for hard things to come. And so I remember seeing this sign, and I love this particular quote here that says, "Don't tell God that you have a big problem. Tell your problem that you have a big God." I love that. And then I also, because of the way I was brought up with my parents and so forth, I also had faith that God still knew who I was, and He wasn't going to let my family and I just die off and starve to death. And so I had to have some faith that sometimes good things fall apart so that better things can fall together. And I have to say, Dean, that basically one of those better things in my life was the ending of that business, because that led us to some other things and be able to work together on a full-time basis. But we need to go back even before that particular moment in time, all the way back to when Tanya and I first got married, moved into the ward in Mesa. It's actually technically in Tempe, Arizona. Yeah. And got up in front of the elders' quorum, and they asked me to introduce myself, and I introduced myself, and there was this young man sitting there in the elders' quorum, and it was you.
That's right. I remember very distinctively when I first heard you and introduced yourself. It was my opportunity to, afterwards, Spirit said, I need to go talk with this guy.
Yeah.
And so I came up and talked with you, and it was just like immediate, how we became immediate brothers. And so we started spending time together. We both had young families, and things started. And this is where I started sharing you some of my research and insights. And you, at the same time, we were both natural researchers because we were just doing it as a hobby there for a while. And then you moved up to Utah and started your business up there and so forth. And then when that didn't work out, you'd been learning about my scientific research. So it just led right into
how many years have you been working on this?
Yeah, research? So it was 1990 is when I started to actually do my
years.
Yeah, it's been over 30 years now, and archaeological research was the very first stuff. And when I started researching that, and actually finally was able to put the pieces of the puzzle together of North American archaeology. No one has ever done this before. To this day, archaeologists do not have a clue of the time frame and who these people were and how they lived here and everything. And of course, my background being LDS and all, I knew the scriptures were true. I knew there was something there. And so I started studying that every day. I started collecting my own artifacts, and I started having these experiences that were just extraordinary. I mean, I wasn't on a mission, but I was having these type of mission experiences, and it was just, I didn't really quite understand it all. And what ended up happening was the discoveries that were made, I knew I needed to put in a book. And I've known ever since I was a very young age that I would be writing a book. And so when I went to talk to a professor, fast forward to about 1993, and then I went and talked to a professor at that time and tried to find out
Professor where?
Well, yeah, I don't know if I necessarily want to get into all that. but this individual's still alive today. But the point is, I've talked with dozens of professors over the years. Okay, so this particular professor, I tried to ask him some questions, and it was about archaeology. And he had written concerning the Book of Mormon an awfully lot. I mean, he was like the individual that when you go to the bookstore,
kind of the guru of
that's right. I thought he would. I kind of looked at him as a mentor when I first started, but after talking to him just for a few minutes, I could tell I was actually like a fly on his computer screen. Every question I had, he tried to avoid it and wouldn't go there. And then eventually, I had an experience there that helped me understand, because I had already graduated from BYU years earlier, and I had been kept aside from the false philosophies and ideas that were being taught there.
Well, you were actually in a field, though, that because I don't know, he doesn't say this very much, but he basically had a company, or started a company, is actually one of the biggest commercial appraising companies in the state of Arizona even today, as I understand it. But you started that. He did commercial appraisal. Started off with residential appraising, and then
that was my area. My research actually. I learned
made it possible to do the research.
Right. I learned from my real estate background how you had to do an appraisal. You have to understand the comparables, and that research led me to understand how to do scientific research. It's a lot of similar things there, and so. The research started in 1990, and after 3 years, I met with this professor, and all of a sudden, I was woke to what was really going on. This professor did not believe in the universal flood. This is Noah's flood, and it's in the scriptures. Every prophet that has been written about, and it's in the Book of Mormon, all acknowledges Noah as a prophet, and that the flood was a real event that occurred.
Do you know what his background was?
He was an anthropologist, and so he was somebody who's supposed to believe in the flood. And yet he didn't. He denied it right in front of me. And it shocked me, and I left. I had a very bad feeling, and I left the office, and I had a spiritual experience after that helped me understand that the things that I had been told earlier in life that I was going to do were now to start. And that's where the universal model officially started. And I knew at that point that I was going to be going into science full time. I was going to have to leave the real estate stuff, and then I would be doing research. And it was a very exciting time of my life. And that went about 7 years later is when I actually just started writing the universal model. The first 10 years is where the universal model all the insights of all the sciences. So this is something we call omnology. So it's this omni is all things, and the study of all the natural sciences is called omnology.
That makes you a knowledgeist.
Yeah. So matter of fact, I'll just pop up here and show this right here. I'm holding up a book. This was the first volume that came out. This is called the Universal Model, Volume 1, The Earth System. This is over 800 pages and has over 2,000 quotes from all the journal articles and their websites and their textbooks from scientists themselves. So this is their words, and they're in blue. You open it up and look almost on any page.
Tens of thousands of references to mainstream scientific journals, and there's no religion in it per se. It's just purely science. But pure and true science and true religion will always be fully compatible with each other.
And our President Nelson,
truth is truth,
President Nelson has said this exactly right. And these are the only books that I know, scientific books that you can read and is fully compatible with all the Church's scriptures. Because in here we demonstrate, this very first volume, we demonstrate that how the earth was made, how we make rocks. Okay, we actually make rocks and show that. And then in this book here, Volume 2 is the living system, and so in here we actually go in and show how living things are made, and the history of man, and the history of what the earth, how it was created, and how long man's been on the earth. From a science perspective, it's no more millions or billions of years. It follows exactly what the scriptures have always taught.
And I'm so excited. We're going to talk a lot more about this, folks, as we get into this podcast. I wanted to share with you just a little bit of some of the experiences that Dean and I had together as we were exploring this. So he had been working on the universal model for about 10 years before I came involved. Then I was your senior scientific researcher on the project for about 7 years. And let me just share with you guys a little bit more about. So this is one of the really profound experiments that we talk about. I talk about this a lot because I was really directly involved. This is one of the really amazing experiences.
That was over 15 years ago. How young you look.
Yeah, if I had my hat up, I actually still had hair back then. But it's the same mustache. Yeah. No, but this is actually showing an image of the very first time that the petrified wood, folks, was actually created in a laboratory setting in lab there in Arizona. And this is the reactor, and you can see there's a piece of quartz on the top of it that actually grew about double its size in about 48 hours or so. Mm-hmm. And then a piece of wood that was placed in that system. Once we understood how quartz rocks form, we don't have to kind of get into all this. This is a week-long discussion in and of itself. But bottom line is that piece of wood was turned into a rock in less than about 48 to 56 hours.
2 days, yeah.
A couple of days. And then there was other experiments. We went. We took planes and went to fly over geological areas of southern Utah and northern Arizona a couple different times actually. This is a group of us going before we headed down into the Grand Canyon to do research on the geological layers of the Grand Canyon. This is the Bright Angel Trail going down there. This was awesome. This was Biosphere 3.
Yeah, Arizona.
And the purpose of Biosphere was to do what?
They wanted to show scientifically that man could live in his own environment and man create their environment.
Create the whole environment.
The problem is inside here that it was from the very beginning a failed experiment. They didn't realize that there's microbes involved all through the whole ecosystem they were in, and they tried to make this to where the oxygen levels in there would stay the same as naturally around us, because this whole building had a stainless steel floor in it, and they tried to keep it all enclosed, but immediately the oxygen levels went down. It failed. They had to pump oxygen in just to stay alive.
So people could stay alive in there.
And so the amazing thing is they still today are trying, in the news, you can go find articles today that they literally think, especially Elon Musk, thinks that he's going to go to Mars and create one of these. They can't do it on Earth. You can't do it underneath the ocean, but they think they're going to go on another planet and do it.
Yeah. The bottom line is that they believe that they could basically become kind of godlike and set up this whole thing, even though all of the organisms were already set up by God.
Yeah.
But they were going to be able to basically replicate what the Earth does And they couldn't do it without having to come in and actually intervene and so forth. It was amazing to hear that. This is actually a sacred lake up of the Zuni people. This is a volcanic caldera, but it's filled with salt.
Yeah,
it's very cool. This is another picture here. This is Dean actually in Arches National Park. I don't know if you can see him way down there at the bottom there, holding his hand up. But this is one of the big double arches there.
Yeah, we explain how those arches are made.
How is sandstone formed? There isn't really any good answers for that.
No, modern geology can't explain it.
Yeah. This is Utah is amazing as far as, and Arizona as well, as far as geological outcroppings and things that are just bizarre or strange or hard to explain.
Yeah.
And this is Goblin Valley in Utah. And how does that kind of a formation?
Well, that's one thing in the UM. We just don't talk about stuff. We actually do experiments and show.
That's right.
I mean, for the first time ever, we took sand and turned it into sandstone. And that sandstone, today I still have the pieces that we made in our reactor, and they're in water, and they still have not dissolved.
And not only that, the sand itself.
Yes. Where does that come from?
For the first time in understanding that sand around the world, sand dunes, do not
from
necessarily
erosion.
come from erosion.
No.
Some erosion happens, but
Yes.
not enough to create these massive dunes.
No.
So where does it come from? It's all explained in the universal model.
Yes. And the key to all of that is actually understanding the universal flood. So this is in volume 1, right here in this book. We actually have over 500 pages describing not only how the earth was made, but in 4,365 years ago, when the flood happened, how it happened, and how most of the rocks on the surface of the earth, all the sedimentary rocks, were formed out of the flood. And without that understanding, you cannot explain geology today. And so this is why this is a revolutionary new millennial science. You notice our subtitle there, a new millennial science.
Yeah. So back to just a couple of other, we went to, I think one time I figured out it's about 26 or 27 national and state parks and so forth to go
all across the western United States.
Look at these things, and including things like petrified forest. If you're going to understand how petrified wood forms, you're going to need to go to petrified forest and look at how these gigantic logs and so forth were formed. This is actually up at Fossil Ridge in Yellowstone National Park, where I almost got eaten by a bear there. No, just kidding. No, well, there was a bear, but anyway. This is Buell Crater, which is about a
3 miles across. Is the largest crater in Arizona, and this is a hydrocrater.
Huge crater.
Craters are a really critical part of the universal model because they help us understand how the Earth was made. Other planets that have craters on them, unless you understand that most of the craters are what we call hydrocraters. They're steam explosion craters. And without that,
they're not from impacts.
Nope, they're not from impacts. 99% plus are not impact craters like we're taught in school.
Yeah.
So understanding craters is critical because the geologists acknowledge without that understanding, you can't understand how the planet formed.
Yeah, and that's one of the critical understandings as well, because the formation of the planet, how the Earth, how was it actually formed? What is it made of?
Right.
If you start off with a foundation that is wrong on the very materials that the Earth is made from,
Yep.
then you're never going to be able to get it. It's kind of like the great and spacious building that was talked about by Father Lehi in his vision.
Exactly.
The foundation, they had all these people in the great and spacious building, and they were all mocking those who had a knowledge of the gospel. And by the way, we're using the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon as always in these podcasts here, but basically they were mocking those people who believed in this, because they felt like they were in this great and spacious building.
Exactly.
And clearly this was much more firm. But when you understand that the building was standing, as it were, in the air,
Yes.
it had no foundations.
No foundation. And this is what we see with modern science today. So let's give our your listeners here, for the very first time, if you never heard of the universal model before, at the very beginning in our introduction chapters, which are some of the most important chapters in the book, what you find is what we call the big picture of modern science. So if you go take a class right now in archaeology, biology, chemistry, physics, all of the ologies, which is the study of, what you're going to find is modern science teaches that mankind came from an ape-like creature, which came from a bacteria, which came from chemicals, which comes from a big bang, which came from nothing. How
Well,
does
they don't actually say that came from nothing, do they? Really?
Well, that's why we have their quotes in the book.
Well, we have Stephen Hawking.
Yeah.
In his book, he actually says that everything in the entire universe came from nothing. There was nothing, and then the singularity appeared, and then that singularity was as small as the period at the end of a sentence, and all of a sudden it began to expand into the entire known universe as we know it. Does that really make sense to anyone who's got any kind of logical thinking ability?
Yeah. And that's the problem. Modern science is supposed
to be... Even
kids
understand that something doesn't come from nothing.
That's right. They get that. And modern science is supposed to be logical. But this has been thrown out the window. The baby, everything with it, went out the window when they started believing in the Big Bang. Because the Big Bang completely goes against all logic. And in Volume 3, which we haven't talked about yet, and we're still working on, so we haven't published that one, but that's one in process. This is where we have new physics, new chemistry, and new astronomy. We actually go in and show the physical evidence that there was no Big Bang, and how everything is organized in the universe.
Okay, now Dean, so I gotta just say this because for all of you who are out there, so what you're saying is that science has got it wrong? How can science? I mean, we're talking millions upon millions of dollars have been spent, and thousands upon thousands, maybe even to the point of millions of scientists in all of these different fields with all of these amazing instruments and all this incredible ways of seeing things and learning and so forth.
Yeah.
They're all wrong.
Yeah. Well, when we got to define what wrong means, okay? So let's look at it this way. First off, there are correct things taught in science, okay? They're not everything correct, and this is the master mingler. Lucifer is the master mingler. He always takes a little bit of truth and mingles it with the air. The problem is that we have in technology a lot of truth, and the reason we know it's true is it works. When you have a phone or computer,
we can observe it. It's empirical.
It's empirical evidence. We can actually
talk about that when we get into Korihor. Hang on, folks. We're going to get right into scriptures here.
Yes. So this is real important to understand that modern technology, it has to work or it doesn't sell. We're not going to buy a phone that works 1 out of 20 times when you use it, right? So we have
or
to
theoretically works.
Yes, or theoretically. My computer will theoretically.
Picture. Yeah,
that's right. Your computer can never tell you though how the craters in the moon formed. Okay, you can look it up on Google and it'll tell you by impact, but that's false. When you read our book, you're going to see hundreds of examples in here demonstrating how craters are really made. Okay, they're steam explosion craters, and you have to understand how rocks are made. Rocks don't come from magma, which is a melt. We're all told the center of the earth is this hot molten material. Well, guess what, folks? It's not. All you have to do is ask a simple question. All the hard questions are easy when we know the answers. And the simple question
kind of a mantra of the UN.
That's right. This is our very first principle in the okay, is let's go and ask ourselves, who's seen the magma? Who's been to the center of the earth and seen all this hot magma? Answer, no one. And then we say, okay, well, where's the heat coming from to melt all the rock down in there? Answer, there is no answer in modern science. They tried to use radioactivity, but that doesn't work because when you have, my wife and I met, for example, in Hawaii, right? And in Hawaii, it's a volcanic island, right?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't go out in our radioactive suits when we went on the beach. We were in bathing suits, okay? None of the rocks there are radioactive. As a matter of fact, in nature, none of them are that produce heat, okay? You and I went to that uranium mine. Remember, we have a picture in the book in here. I could actually show you. There's a lot of pictures in the book with Rod. He was the model. Okay? He's our universal model.
Universal model.
So he's holding this.
That's true, but you are the dean of science.
So he was holding up this Geiger counter here, right? And we
Geiger counter's going crazy.
It was going crazy.
It's yellow cake, they call it.
That's right. And we took some of that yellow ore off there, and we're holding it in our hands. It was radioactive.
Ow.
Oh, gosh, it was the same temperature as all the other rocks around us. So this is the problem science has, is they have not been able to demonstrate any mechanism for the center of the earth being hot. There isn't any. That's because it's not hot. We know there's a liquid down there. And this is because sound waves going through the earth.
We know that rocks can get hot because we do have volcanoes and that
does
throw out lava comes out of them.
And guess what the does? It explains exactly where lava comes from. Where does lava come from, Rod? We could
friction.
If I was up close on there, I could show this, but I can actually rub my hands together. We got a little picture in the book that actually shows the skin lava, right? I can rub them hard enough, and that's important because when I put my hands together with 1,000,000 pounds of pressure and 1 centimeter movement, now we have literally tens of thousands of degrees in a fault line, and we only need 2,400 to melt rock. So melting rock and lava, that's real. That's we can see that. But trying to go down inside the earth and showing their magma, there's never been any evidence for that.
Well, let's get back to just a couple of more things here. So that pretty much was the information I wanted to show as far as the just some of the different places that we had been to, like again the Grand Canyon. This is Upheaval Dome in southern Utah.
Southern Utah, right?
Amazing place.
And
I almost died there.
They thought that was an impact. They thought that was an impact crater, right?
Yeah.
You went down to the
That's
bottom.
about 2 miles across there, and I hiked all the way down to the
this
bottom.
is an
of it.
important hydrocrater that has an out channel.
Yes.
Of water that came out of that and went.
Yep. And explanations about Yellowstone and so forth, and volcanoes and volcanic cones. And all of these different things. Sand, this is Imperial Dunes down by California, Arizona, and Mexico. Mm-hmm. Just some of the places that we were doing. This is studying hard. Yeah, those sand dunes were all nice and clean when we first got there. But we had to tear them up a little bit with the machines. That was fun. And then just all kinds of other things. This is one of our fun experiences there at Mount St. Helens.
Yes.
We got to take a couple of our kids and actually go on a helicopter down to Spirit Lake and all down the little Grand Canyon of Mount St. Helens,
right,
which has some amazing evidences. Numerous layers of geologic layers were laid down
millions of years
in a few months.
Yeah,
and then carved out into a huge canyon in less than a year. And all those layers are still there. But these are some of the logs there on that were still 15 years ago or whatever, still sitting there on Spirit Lake. In fact, we're going there in August, it looks like. Possibly.
We're going to. No, they've actually had to postpone that. Okay. Virus going on.
Okay. This is actually Dean and I, when we met the mayor of Topaz Mountain. Had about 3 teeth in his head there, and
digging out.
This is digging topaz crystals and so forth, and then just other wonderful places there that we've been able to explore. This is Hawaii. The bottom line. Let's go back to the scriptures here. So let's get actually into this is Alma chapter 30. So if you have your annotated edition of the Book of Mormon. This is going to be on page 261 is where it starts off here. And let me just kind of go through a couple of things. What we want to do first off, we want to actually show what are some of the doctrines of Antichrist. Korihor was one of the Antichrists that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon. And what were some of the false doctrines that he was promoting? What was the effect of those false doctrines? Mm-hmm. How did Alma basically refute those false doctrines, and what did he say? And so we were just going to jump right in here. First off with the verse 1 here. It says, "Behold, now it came to pass that after the people of Ammon were established in the land of Jershon, yea, and also all the Lamanites were driven out of the land, and their dead were buried by the people of the land. Now their dead were not numbered because of the greatness of their numbers. Anyway, and it came to pass that they had buried their dead, and also after the days of fasting and morning prayer, it's the 16th year, they were observing the laws of Moses strictly." This is an important thing that Amberly Nelson brings out, that they were at this point in time living the laws of Moses strictly.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden comes this guy by the name of Korihor, and basically, and he says he was Antichrist. Didn't say he was the Antichrist, just as he is one of people who are Antichrist. And he began to preach to the people. This is in verse 5.
Chapter 30.
Chapter 30. Now I want to skip down here. What were some of the things that he started to teach? Verse 11. "For there was a law that men should be judged according to their crimes. Nevertheless, there was no law against a man's belief." So they could believe whatever they wanted to. Mm-hmm. That was okay in their civilization. "Therefore, a man was punished only for the crimes which he had done. Therefore, all men were on equal grounds. And this Antichrist, whose name was Korihor, and the law could have no hold upon him, began to preach unto the people that there should be no Christ. And after this manner did he preach, saying, And that's where I want to kind of write some things down here. So this is the first one of the first things is that there could be no Christ. Basically, that's the number one thing is he's Antichrist.
Because Christ hadn't come yet. Remember, you can't know the future.
Yeah. He says, "O ye that are bound down under a foolish and vain hope." So Christ had not come yet. So this was basically just a hope. And he's saying this was foolish and it was vain. He says, "Why do you yoke yourselves with such foolish things? Why do you look for a Christ? For no man can know of anything which is to come." Nobody knows the future, right? "Behold, these things which ye call prophecies, which ye say are handed down by holy prophets, behold, they are foolish traditions." And they came down from who? Prophets, and these prophets were their fathers. They were right. Israelites. So they came down through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so forth, right. And all the way back to Adam and Eve, which tells us something about what's going to happen in the future. It says, "But behold, ye cannot know of these things which ye do not see." So I wanted to talk just a little bit about that. And I know that we talked about this a lot in the universal model stuff. Can you ever really know something you can't see?
So this is a really good question. And then in the beginning of the universal model, we talk about knowledge. Okay, science actually means to know. And the way scientists know things is they use our 5 physical senses. Okay, like seeing, for example. The problem with this is there's one other sense, and that's the 6th sense of logic. Okay, so these 6 senses are what science uses to know things. The problem is a magician can't have a job if he can't fool your eyes. And our ears can be fooled. We can play on our phone the music of a bird, and if it's hidden, you can't see where that sound's coming from. You know,
even the birds are faked out.
The birds are faked out. That's right. They all start singing.
It's not a bird, it's a phone.
They're singing to our phone. So we have to recognize that even logic, an entire country, Germany, followed a leader that led them to a world war. So we have to recognize that all these things can be fooled. There is a 7th sense. Now, it turns out that the scientist today does acknowledge this sense. It's called intuition. Okay. But they don't want to take it to the length that spiritual people do. People that have a background in understanding the scriptures and that type of thing. We, as Latter-day Saints, understand that the 7th sense is in Moroni 10:5. By the power of the Holy Ghost, you may know the truth of some things. No, all things.
All things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is really important because this is how we can know absolutely the truth. And all things means things in the past, right now, and things in the future, including Christ coming again, including things that the prophets have prophesied. The Spirit can bear witness to us of things in the future. So this is something modern science can't do. And this is the limitation of modern science, where scientists have to rely on the physical, temporal things. As a spiritual person, you can use the Holy Ghost. Now, this is critical to understand because not all scientists believe this, but we have a survey back done over 20 years ago. 93% of the scientific leaders took their own survey, and what they found...
It wasn't our survey, it was theirs.
It was their survey, that's right. And in that survey, 93% of the scientists, leaders, acknowledged they were either agnostic or atheist. So the vast majority, today it's much even higher. Almost.
Higher than 93%?
Higher than 93%. You have entire, like at Harvard, one of the biologists said there, well, everybody in my department's an atheist. I know every one of them personally. And you have entire colleges in volume 2, under the human model, we actually go in there and show research of colleges. The entire college does not have one Republican. It's all liberals. There's something called political science, and it's a big part of shaping our society, okay? And the politics are the scientists have latched on to the liberal side, and they're anti-God, okay? And so when you're looking at atheists and where they're all gathering together, they're gathering around this everything from nothing. This is the big picture of modern science, that everything came from nothing. There's no logic to it.
They don't really promote that heavily. I mean, it's so illogical that they don't. We had to kind of search a little bit. But when you have Stephen Hawking, who is, what is he, the man of the century according to Time magazine, I think it was. When you have his book saying that came from nothing, but you have to go and you search it out. They don't promote that idea.
Yeah, well, they kind
Kids
of...
are never told that when they're going to school.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we've had to go in and find all the quotes and put them together and show them. And that's why the UM is so unique, is every page in it is unique, because we're actually showing you stuff you're not going to read in other books, okay? Yeah. So anyway, this comes down to we have to be prepared today for the scientists today that are teaching us atheistic science. And then unfortunately, we have these things going on in the church. Okay, we have people that are not following what the prophets have taught, and so hopefully we'll talk a little.
We're going to talk about that
in
a little bit.
Korihor was denying the Christ. He was denying the future, that we can know anything in the future, and that goes directly against the scriptures.
Yeah, well, he's basically saying, we can't ever believe something that we can't see, which is what he's saying here. He actually says that several different times in these little excerpts here. He says. You cannot know that there shall be a Christ. You look forward and say that you shall you see a remission of your sins, and behold, it is the effect of a frenzied mind. Isn't it interesting? Now, one thing I want to make clear here, and that is that when it comes down to it, I like to call people traditionalists, which are more, I guess, in the political world they're being called conservative, or progressives, which are basically people who don't believe in the traditions, don't believe in the traditional things, and those would typically be more. Originally, the word liberal was different. It's been kind of co-opted now to basically. So I like to use the term progressive, because that basically is talking about people who don't believe in the traditions, don't believe in the original material, and so. But he said the frenzied mind. Why? Because of the traditions of your fathers, which lead you away into a belief of things which are not so. And if you can't see it, then you can't believe it, right? Yeah. That was Korihor's main point here. Okay. Yeah. So
he ends up coming. We all know the story here, where it ends up leading to, where he comes up and denies Christ. Yeah. And then Alma, what I find so interesting.
Several times.
Yeah. So when Alma says you're going to deny him one more time, it's not going to be my will, but if the Lord deems it okay, you're going to be struck dumb. And this is all of a sudden changes everything. See, the physical reality, scientists used to poo-poo these very first individuals that looked under a microscope and showed that there was these small little things that our eyes couldn't see in the water. Yeah. Okay. And when you take dirty water, it has certain pathogens in them, which are the bad microbes.
Things like amoebas and
all kinds of things that can cause disease. All of a sudden, now their whole world changed. Microbiology became a science. And then we started to demonstrate, just like washing your hands. The first doctors in Europe that heard that dirty hands would kill babies, they just thought it was crazy.
Well, they go work on cadavers and then go and deliver babies in the same hospital, and they couldn't figure out why so many mothers and babies were dying from this. Exactly.
And it wasn't until later on that several of these doctors went in and they did surveys, and they found that the house, what do they call them, birthing mothers, and they were more clean and keeping their hands clean and so forth. They weren't having the amount of deaths that the doctors were actually having.
Midwives.
So this changed everything in the medical world, and this is what happens in all the sciences, and it should continue happening. We, as Latter-day Saints, need to look to never be afraid of the truth, because the truth will always not just make us free, it helps us know all things. God literally is truth. So if we stay true to truth, then we will eventually not only know true science, but we can also come to know all the true prophecy.
And God gave us some hints to go with. He didn't just put Adam and Eve here on the earth and say, "There you go and learn." Nope. He helped them. He taught them. He helped them understand. This is where the tradition of the fathers originally came from Adam and Eve, and then all the way through these prophets who God basically spoke with. This is where we get our scriptures from. But here we have this Korihor. He doesn't want to believe in the prophets and what they had taught, because he's going, well, if you can't see it, if you can't show me, then I'm not going to believe. Well, he got shown. But let me go into a couple of these. These are things that this is verse 17. These are some of the different categories of unbelief or anti-God stuff that he's talking about. Verse 17, and many more things did he say unto them, telling them that could be no atonement made for the sins of men, but every man fared in this life according to the management of the creature. That's basically sophism.
That's right.
That everything is just dependent upon us, what we do. It's all
Random.
We are just out there in the world, and what happens to us randomly just happens. And so that's sophism. Therefore, every man prospered according to his genius. So if somebody's smarter than someone else, he's going to prosper better than somebody else.
This is Darwinism, the fittest.
Yeah, and actually Darwinism is in an even larger category, which is basically naturalism.
Yep.
That basically that we succeed because of our intelligence. Our brain is bigger, right?
Yep.
Supposedly, right? And that every man conquered according to his strength. That's egoism. And
that's Freud.
That's right. And whatever a man did was no crime. That's relativism.
That's relativism.
So, and thus he did preach unto them, leading away the hearts of many, causing them to lift up their heads in their wickedness. That's hedonism, right there. Even to be proud in their wickedness. Yea, leading away many women and also men to commit whoredoms, telling them that when a man was dead, that was the end thereof. That was nihilism.
Yeah, that's the sinning.
And that's the sinning. So basically, these are all different philosophies of man
that we've seen all through the history of man.
Yes, but here they all are
listed in
evidence,
one place.
In one place with this Korihor guy. So then he goes basically before the high priest of Gedonha and so forth, and he basically has this little interaction. And then he goes over ultimately fast forward there. But I want to point out a couple of points though that Korihor makes. He says the reason why you prophets want to do this is because you want to usurp power and authority. You want to have the power and authority over us. You want to hold us and keep us bound down with these vain traditions.
And don't forget, they're getting paid for it, right?
Yes.
All their preaching, they're getting paid for.
And they can keep them in ignorance. Okay. So that's another thing. They're trying to keep these people ignorant from the woke people, that know more about God and so forth, more about the earth and what really life is about than what God does. He says to keep them down, even as it were in bondage. This is from verse 27. And thus ye lead away this people after the foolish traditions of your fathers and according to your own desires, and ye keep them down, even as it were in bondage, that ye may glut yourselves with the labors of their hands. Now, what's he talking about here? Amberly Nelson actually gives us a really good understanding of this, because basically, back in this point in time, Alma is he's not only the chief priest, but he's also basically the king over the land, right? So he's having these kind of things.
Chief judge, yeah.
The chief judge, yeah, because there was no king. This is right. the time of the judges, and yet they're living the laws of Moses. And there was actually a lot that the priests would get. When they offer sacrifices, he would get a portion of that. When they offered different kinds of sacrifices, he would actually get quite a lot of that. They actually did get a lot of material from these sacrifices, which was according to the law, which I'll talk about that in just a second. In fact, let's just go over to that right now. So now this is then Alma questions Korihor. It says, it came to pass in verse 30, came to pass that when he was brought before Alma and the chief judge, he did go on in the same manner as he did in the land of Gideon. Yea, he went on to blaspheme. And he did rise up in great swelling words before Alma, and did revile against the priests and teachers, accusing them of leading away the people after the silly traditions of their fathers, for the sake of glutting on the labors of the people. So here's a second time he's now in front of Alma, and he's accusing Alma and the priests of glutting themselves. And Alma said unto them, Thou knowest that we do not glut ourselves upon the labors of the people. For behold, I have labored even from the commencement of the reign of judges until now, with my own hands for my support, notwithstanding my many travels around the land to declare the word of God unto my people, and notwithstanding the many labors which I have performed in the church, I have never received so much as even one senine for my labor, neither has any of my brethren, save it were in the judgment seat, and then we have received only according to the law of our time. So they were actually receiving things, but only according to the Mosaic law, which was their sacrifices and so forth, which actually was a substantial amount of money. This is how the priests.
Well, this could have been also their judging when he was doing the judging for the people. So judges today were paid too, yeah. Yes. But all of the spiritual preaching, there was never any gain.
He was totally getting. He was totally getting the.
He says down here in verse 30, then, and why sayest thou that we preach unto this people to get gain, and when thou thyself knowest that we receive no gain?
Yeah.
And now believest thou that we deceive this people that causes such joy in their hearts? And he said, yea. So now he changes, okay, this guy's like, he's off the rocker. Let's just ask him straight up. Believest thou that there is a God in verse 37?
Yeah.
Nay.
Nay. So he
Verse 38.
He flat out denies it.
Right. So now we get into where he goes to deny and what happens.
Okay. And this is verse 40. And this is one of my, I love this because that word evidence has played such a big part in my life.
Yeah,
You know, the evidence is
so
for the scriptures being true, the evidence for the Book of Mormon being true.
Yeah, and as LDS, we don't really recognize that we have more evidences than any other Christian people. We have the Book of Mormon. We have all these other scriptures. We have literally, when you read the beginning of the Book of Mormon, how many people, 8 witnesses and 3 witnesses, saw the plates, saw, Leahona and the sword of Laban, okay? They held these things in their hands. And then an angel came, okay? So these are physical things that they experienced. And this is why we all can relate to this, and the Spirit can bear witness that these things actually happened. And that's why when a missionary comes on someone's door, they don't just say, trust me, right? They actually put in their hands a blue book that says the Book of Mormon, another testament of Christ. You can physically hold in your hand something that came from golden plates, and you can read for yourself and know for yourself that these things are true.
That's right.
So this is in critical importance, that there are physical things that we didn't come to this earth just to be spiritual. We came as a temporal being because the only way you get a fullness of joy, the Lord has made it very clear, is when you have both the physical and the spiritual brought together. And that's why after the resurrection, we are to have perfect bodies and then have that physical component. Without it, you can't become like God.
I've mentioned to people, God would not be God if he didn't have the physical component of his body. It's not enough for him to just have a spirit body, apparently. He has to have a physical body in conjunction with the spirit.
Yes.
Body.
Everything was created first spiritually. We have to understand that, okay? He basically is like doing a house, okay? When you go to build a house, you have plans. You draw it all out. It's not the actual house, okay? But you can see it. On the computer today, you can even do a 3D. It's really neat how you go in and do this. My kids are building houses, and so I've been involved with this and helping them do this. We did ours over 30 years ago, and it's really neat to see the house coming. But it's not real. It's something there on the computer. But then we go in.
But it wouldn't actually work physically if you didn't actually have the plans.
You have to have
out there
organized.
Instead of just like nailing stuff together.
Yeah, and what's so amazing to me in the scientific world is how they want to think everything came from an explosion, which is random nothingness. Came from nothing, literally, and it's a random thing. Everything in the universe is organized. And in Volume 3, we actually get into explaining everything from the atom all the way up to the entire universe is revolutionary. This is very, very important because time is the most constant of all constants. Physicists don't understand this. Einstein tried to take us away from the most constant of all constants, which is time. He tried to make speed of light constant, and it's not. It's only in a laboratory that you have this speed of light that over 1 meter goes this distance. But out in nature everywhere, it is not. So this is really a big deal in Volume 3 when we get into the universe system and talking about all this stuff. But it's from the atom to the entire universe that we see order. God is a God of order, and everything that he has done in his creation is orderly, and Lucifer wants to destroy everything. And atheism is all about chaos and randomness, and that's not how nature is. Yeah. Everything is created and organized in nature.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, randomness and chaos lead to destruction typically.
Yep.
As we've seen in riots and so forth that have happened in our nation here more recently. That it doesn't. These cities didn't come about because of randomness and chaos.
No, very organized.
There's some amount of randomness that happens and so forth, but if you have pure randomness and chaos, nothing happens.
No.
We are down here to, and now what evidence have ye that there is no God, or that Christ cometh not? This is verse 40. I say unto you, ye have none, save it be your word only. But behold, I have all things as a testimony that these things are true. He says all things here, but let's go on just a little bit further.
Yep.
Verse 42. Behold, I know that thou believest, but thou art possessed with a lying spirit, and ye have put off the Spirit of God, that it may have no place in you. But the devil has power over you, and he doth carry you about, working devices, that he may destroy the children of God. This is the reason for Antichrist,
This
folks,
is the purpose.
is to destroy the children of God. That's the whole point of this.
Yep.
And now Korihor said unto Alma, If thou wilt show me a sign, that I might be convinced that there is a God, yea, show me that he hath power, and then I will be convinced of the truth of thy words. And Alma said unto him, Thou hast had signs enough. Will ye tempt your God? Well, what signs has Korihor had? Well, he's going to tell Korihor the signs that he had.
Verse 44.
Will ye say, Show me a sign when ye have the testimony of all these thy brethren, and also the holy prophets? So that's one of the things that he knows. He said, The scriptures are laid before thee. He says, but I love this. Yea, and all things denote there is a God. Yea, even the earth, and all things which are on the face of the earth. Yea, and its motion, yea, and all the planets which move in their regular form, do witness that there is a supreme creator. Now, Dean, as the Dean of Science, as you have done this research in the science, have you felt that this all could have even possibly happened by random chance, or is this something that there had to be a supreme creator? And if so, how has this affected your understanding of science?
When I first started studying science, it was very interesting to me was to look at the Latter-day Saint scientific world, and I had taken a lot of science classes and so forth, but you know what? We didn't call ourselves creationists. And when you hear the word creationist, you're typically thinking of some other Christians, and this is so wrong. Okay, there should be no more affirmative Christians than Latter-day Saints, because we have the creation process not told just in the Bible like other Christians have. We have the pearl
3 times.
Well, 4 times when you count the temple.
We have
the pearl of
3
great
times in the
price.
scriptures.
That's right. Moses and Abraham and Genesis and the temple. So why did the Lord 4 different places? Why do we learn this over and over and over, especially when we go to the temple?
Well, he must not have wanted us to know that.
Well, we have to keep in perspective how important the creation process is.
Clearly, God needed us and wants us to understand.
And it's the history of the earth, and it's the history of mankind. Mankind's been on the earth for 6,000 years. When you want to say some humanoids have been around for 20,000 years, 40,000 years, that's totally baloney. Look at the scriptures and look at our DNA evidence. You and I found together, and you've shown a lot in your firm foundation and stuff. The DNA evidence shows that man's been here for 6,000 years. We have a lot of other evidence in a lot of other fields besides just biology and DNA. This is all in volume 2, where we go into the age of the earth and the age of man. But it's just so simple to me that when you look at the creation of the earth, by the way, there's 7 periods of the creation, okay? Yeah. And it turns out most people don't recognize the very first verse of the Bible says, the God created heaven and the earth, right? And I love to ask people, so what did he create in the beginning when he created the earth? What was the very first thing he made? What was the substance? Most people go, and then once you bring out, it's in the second verse, in the beginning.
The earth was without form.
Okay, and the earth was without form and void.
Darkness is upon the face of
the deep. Remember, form is hard. That's a solid. So it had to be a liquid or a gas. Okay, this is all there is.
It doesn't have a form.
Okay, deep in Hebrew means oceans. And the Spirit of the Lord, Spirit of God, moved upon the face of the waters. In the beginning, God created water. This was the very first thing he created. And the reason he did that is because water organizes. You and I came out of our mom's tummy out of a sack of water. All living things have to have water to exist. Every cell has to have water because we reproduce the cells.
There's no living anything that doesn't have
water. Exactly. Yeah. And all the rocks on the earth originally were formed out of water.
Okay, but what do we see out in space, though?
This is very important. In Volume 3, we actually go into space and show the greatest energy source in space, okay, comes from water. This is NASA. This is the scientists telling it, okay? We have their quotes on this. We have the stars. We have every single planet in this solar system, every single moon. There has been water. Even the sun has water on it. These are all quotes from the scientists themselves. This is all in Volume 1. This is so critical.
And it's a big dichotomy. In fact, I remember Scientific American a number of years ago had the front cover of Scientific American was the paradox of the sun's hot corona. And they were talking about how it is that there's this super hot, atmosphere of the sun, but the surface of the sun
It's 5,000 degrees.
is way less. It's over 1 million degrees out here.
Yes.
And then they found actual water, the signatures of water in the spectral analysis.
Yes,
of the sun.
exactly. And when you get out to the corona, it's 1 million degrees. So who goes to their stove, right? It's 300 degrees. You're cooking there. You move away from it, and now you get to 3,000, 30,000 degrees. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, we all get this, but this is what's observed.
The laws of thermodynamics.
Yes, it makes no sense. This thermal gradient doesn't happen anywhere here that we do an experiment with. So they're thinking the sun's heat comes from the center of the earth. It does not.
Center of the sun.
Center of the sun, I'm sorry. The same as the center of the earth, the magma. There is no mechanism for it being hot inside the earth, and there's no mechanism for the inside of the
Where
earth.
did the energy come from to melt 8,000 miles of solid rock into a liquid?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a massive amount of energy.
Not only
Where did all
that,
energy come from?
but all the rocks that we find on the ground today would be glass. They're mostly quartz based on the surface today. Those quartz based rock, when you melt it, turns to glass. Rocks are not glass everywhere. Yeah. So the same thing happens when you go to the sun.
Except for volcanic rocks.
Yes, those are melted ones.
But mostly glass.
Right, yeah. but those are rare, and they come from the fault
Obsidian,
lines.
Yeah.
They come from the fault lines. So what's interesting is when you go to the sun, here the scientists are trying to tell us, how old suns are in other galaxies, far away, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't even understand ours right here. So in Volume 3, we actually show and explain how the sun is interrelated with the Earth and all the other planets, and how it's connected to all these other stars and all that stuff. So what he's saying here is all these, they all denote there's a God because they're organized. They didn't randomly just explode and come into being.
That reminds me of one of the research things that we were doing while we were working together on the universal model. And many of you may remember the tsunami earthquake that happened.
2000, I think, 5 or 8. Yeah.
Yeah, and it caused all these people to die in Indonesia and so forth.
Right.
And basically what it was is it was a 30-meter slide.
30 feet.
Went 30 feet like this. One plate over another plate, basically. That was it. But if you take a look, so now we have David Allen, who is an atomic clock physicist and so forth that works with us and things. But we actually found articles that talked about that the Earth was slowing down its rotation. It was slowly changing, and it was losing about 1/4 of a second per year.
They thought.
Yeah. And so it was slowing down, right? But then all of a sudden we have this tsunami earthquake. And they're going to add, because after 4 years, the atomic clocks would be off by a whole second, which is not acceptable in the atomic clock industry. So basically, you have the circumference of the Earth. You think about the entire circumference of the Earth. In that spot, it went 30 feet less, which is percentage-wise 0.000000% of the circumference of the Earth. But people can realize this when you realize, like, for example, if you have a figure skater, like in the Olympics, and she's skating in one circle, and she has her arms going and whatever. What happens when she pulls her arms in tighter against her body, closer to the center of the rotation? It speeds up. If the Earth went like this, just that little tiny bit, it speeds up, and it turns out that they didn't have to add the leap second to all the atomic clocks of the Earth because the Earth actually self-corrected. Yeah. Well, 1/4 of 1 second per year, folks. This is the kind of... This is the kind of precision that God does.
Yeah, but there's even more to what you're talking about I haven't really shared with you. In Volume 3, we actually get into the time model. And in the time model, we actually show that there's no difference between the atomic clock and the Earth spinning. And we have all the physical evidence for this is because the Earth is kept on its spinning. They can't explain why the electron keeps going around the proton and the atom. What keeps it going? Because there's all these forces around that would slow the electron down, but it doesn't happen.
It should be deaccelerating.
It should be deaccelerating. And the same with the Earth because the tides, right? The water gets pulled in and out. This is the water tide, the ocean tides from the moon and the sun pulling on the Earth, so it should be slowing us down. We're not slowed down. The Earth's spin on its axis and going around the sun is the same as the electron going around. These are all on the same system. So there's a universal energy here that's discussed in Volume 3 that's really exciting. It's a big deal.
So are there any other examples of things that are even the Earth itself, or things that are on the face of the Earth, its motion, yea, and all the planets which move in a regular form to witness that there is a supreme creator? So what has Satan used? What tool do you think that Satan has used really effectively to be able to destroy faith? I think he's used science to a large extent.
They have.
But are there any particular areas of science that you feel have been even the most destructive of faith?
Well, probably the biggest one is all the science fields that come in and try to tell us there's millions and billions of years that took place. This is all radiometric dating. And this entire history of it for the first time in volume 2, right here, this is in the age model. In this book, we have a chapter called The Age Model, and we go into detail, extremely detail, of how this so-called radiometric dating method came up. And it's so ridiculous. When you actually go in, it's the first time we went to all their 1960 and 70 articles, and we pull out the original researchers and how they tried to show, and they had a motive behind them. There was an agenda, and their agenda was to destroy creationism, to destroy Jesus Christ and who he was. That's what they did not want Christians to move forth. And so that's their whole thing.
We have quotes on that.
Yeah, we have quotes of them wanting to do
this.
Yes, and this is important because they wanted to show, they tried to use fossils to show dating of rocks, and of course that doesn't work. See, a fossil, the radiometric dating only works with melted rocks. And you don't have a piece of petrified wood or a dinosaur bone that's been melted. That doesn't work. Okay, so you can't actually.
In other words, it's not a volcanic rock.
Right, and you cannot actually date those fossils. Okay, you have to try to date the layer that they're in. And the problem is, none of the fossils follow the layer. You know, all this.
Well, I thought that the fossils were the indication of how old they were because they're in a certain layer.
Yep.
But then the layer is a certain age because it has certain fossils in it.
Yeah, it's going back and forth. And once you...
That's called circular reasoning.
That's exactly right. And once you realize the universal flood was a real thing, the Noah's flood happened 4,365 years ago. We actually document this in the book, not just the year, but the very month that it took place. Mm-hmm. This is all in volume 2 and 1, actually. Both volumes go into the flood to a great degree. Because once you realize the flood was a real event, every culture in the world has the flood in their history, either oral or written.
Yeah, but there's
everyone.
But how does you ever explain that? I mean, where have we ever had anybody explain where did all the water come from?
And where did it all go?
And yep. Is there any evidence? I mean, if something like that actually did happen,
yes,
then there's got to be evidence all around the entire earth.
Absolutely. And I knew this, and this is what, when I went to the scientist for answers, and he denied that there was a flood. It just blew me away. You know, this is why we show the earth has the water inside it. This is very important. Right where you and I are right now, we could drill down, and guess what? We're going to hit water right here. Everywhere on the surface of the earth is like Swiss cheese down inside. There's water everywhere. And so we actually go in, and here's all the scientific evidence showing the water inside the earth. And this is real critical that we understand that the water, we have the mechanism for how the flood happened. Okay, not only when it happened, but how it happened, how the water came out of the earth. The time of the year that it happened, the bowels of the earth opened up. The scriptures talk about this. Okay, it's very clear that the water came out of the earth and where it came from. And this is what created the pressure and the temperature. You and I have made rocks. Yeah. Who else out in the world? I don't know of any geologist that's made quartz-based rocks.
Well, no one else has ever made petrified wood in the laboratory before.
Like we have, exactly. And this is really important.
This is a big deal, folks. I just want you to understand that this is earth-shattering.
Yes.
This is for the first time being able to have a true answer that is actually fully compatible with what we know from the scriptures. What Alma is saying here, that everything about the earth testifies that there is a God.
Exactly.
There is a supreme creator. But we are all told that if he is, he's around. He's everywhere, and he's nowhere. And
when you find a piece of wood that's on the ground, and then you take it to a scientist, and he says, "Oh, that's millions of years old. That's how that happened. It got buried and took millions of years to make." Well, let's all just for a second look at our backyard. A branch falls off from a storm, lands on the ground, or it's buried in a stream somewhere. What piece of a tree, a branch, turns into a rock on its own? That doesn't happen because there's nowhere on the surface of the earth that tree branches, wood, is being turned into a stone. You have to have 13,000 psi. You have to have 400 degrees Celsius.
This is the recipe, folks.
We know
write down the recipe.
We know the recipe, okay, because in our reactor that we put our wood in, we put it under the pressure and the temperature in water, and when you have the right recipe, it's like making chocolate chip cookies. Yeah. You can turn it into the rock, which is what wood becomes, is a rock.
And when you have answers to these kinds of questions that give you understanding of truth, and it feels right because you're feeling the truth, right?
Yeah.
And so forth. But then when you are able to provide answers for your children, your grandchildren,
this helps them stay rooted
these
in the
scriptures
gospel.
are rooted in truth.
Yes.
But they're not just like the Great and Spacious Building. It's basically just a bunch of false traditions and old, wives' tales and so forth.
Right.
That are basically crazy. That, like he talked about, that's the effect of a frenzied mind. He says. Okay.
That's right.
Hopefully, you're going to see that Dean here and I. Hopefully, we don't come across as two frenzied minds. I mean, we have a deep faith that, brothers and sisters, this is true. And when there are discrepancies between what we know from the scriptures to be true, and we know the creation 3 times plus the temple, right, from the scriptures, if there's discrepancies between that and what are being taught in the scientific fields or in classrooms or in the universities and high schools and even grade schools and middle schools of our nation, if there are discrepancies between the two, brothers and sisters, it's time for us to understand that one of them is wrong. And it's not the gospel.
No.
There will come a day when the truths of the gospel will be understood to be true, and the theories of science will have to conform themselves to the truths of the gospel.
Exactly.
Right now, unfortunately, we have a lot of people, even within the church and even within BYU and places like that truly believe that when there's a discrepancy between the scriptures and what they understand from biology and geology and these other ologies, that eventually the church is going to have to figure it out and
give way
and adjust itself and its understanding to give way to the truths of science. Just so you know, if you're watching this podcast, if you don't already understand that, we just want you to know that that's not our position. Our position is the gospel is true. The scriptures are true. The prophets have been inspired by God. And all of these things testify that there is a God. And if there's things that basically bring us away from that understanding, those things are not
false.
true. And we have now, for the first time, the ability to actually go in scientifically and demonstrate that these false philosophies are, in fact, false. Many of these sciences were developed way back when there really wasn't even instruments. Like the idea of magma came back clear back in the beginning with the Plutonus and the Vulcanus and the Neptunus and so forth.
Yep.
And they had these arguments back and forth, but they had really very little observation.
Exactly.
And yet that has held sway now all the way up until now.
Yep. And it's all going to fall apart because once you take away the magma, now your geological time is gone because all their time is based on melted rock. So you can
the
take
last time when the rocks were all melted was what resets the geological clock back to zero.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can take away geological time. Deep time is gone. The universal model clearly demonstrates, if anyone will read it with an open mind, you can clearly find out that here's the physical evidence showing. And this is an important part that we don't realize, even in the church, that we have these scientists that are teaching atheistic science that are in the church, okay? And this is a huge problem that's going to have to change as we move forward because the scriptures are not going to change, okay? What has to change is people's views of those scriptures and recognizing what they have thought physically, that there's magma in the earth. Nobody's ever seen it, okay? So it's a theory, and a theory is not a law. By the way, each one of these books, the first volume and the second volume has a dozen new natural laws. Volume 3 has about 24 new natural laws. How many years has it been, Rod, since a new natural law has been discovered in modern science? And by a law, we're talking a substantial law, like, for example, Newton's laws. Okay, Newton laws, F equals ma, are these laws that are important for us to be able to send satellites and fly around and so forth were found 300 years ago. Okay? Today, we don't have new natural laws. And the scientists themselves, we have their quote stating that the endpoints of science are theories. The endpoints.
Yeah.
So they're not even looking for natural law.
Goal.
That's the goal.
The
is
goal
a
is
theory.
to create really elaborate theories.
Yeah, and they've tried to make a theory into a law, and you can't do that because a theory is only an idea unless it's proven. And once you prove it, now it's a mathematical law. Most of the laws have math behind it, and we can redo it and reproduce it. This is why E equals MC squared has never been proven. You can't do an experiment and show the math of E equals MC squared. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Now, F equals ma, you can do that in every physics class because force equals mass times acceleration. That's something that's real, okay? But E equals MC
Some
squared.
of this is going to be pretty hard for you to believe, especially if you are in the scientific fields. But actually, it's surprising. What is interesting is as we've been doing this, a lot of times scientists are the first ones to realize that there's a problem because people who are really not involved with science just assume that scientists have it
already
figured
know.
out.
They just got it figured
The
out.
scientists realize, wow, there's all kinds of things
That we don't know.
have an answer to.
No.
And people think that we do, but we really don't. And so it's kind of funny because sometimes it's the people who are not really educated in science that are the most
receptive, and they get it the quickest because they don't have. Imagine going into a library and there's 100,000 books and 75,000 of them are fiction, okay? And there's stuff that's just made up. So and you're going in there trying to find real stuff, and you're not told it's fiction. Well, then you're going through all these books and all this false information, and this is what's happening in modern science. They're reading all these things that don't make you Google it. How are the craters made on the moon? They're all said they're made by impact. Well, they're not. Okay, and we demonstrate that in the book. And once you can see for the first time that this changes all of the thinking. This is why in the millennium, even if you don't want to study and read this now, we're all going to learn in the millennium. Because we have to make planets ourselves.
We're going to learn truth. We're not going to learn philosophies.
No,
and
we're
theories
not.
Of man.
The devil's going to be bound up, and we're going to learn truth. And true science deals with how rocks are made. You don't need millions of years. You can make them very quickly when you understand the process. This is why the floodwaters were covering all the mountains. You take 30,000 feet, which covers Mount Everest, all the mountains. Now you get your 13,000 psi. That's the pressure
Pounds
needed.
per square inch pressure.
That's right. And because of that pressure, underneath on the surface of the earth and with all that water above it, we find petrified wood in every single state in the United States and every country around the world. Why is it on the surface? You don't go down to the Grand Canyon and find layers of petrified wood. There's no salt in these layers of the Grand Canyon. There's no oil in layers in the Grand Canyon. These things don't exist there because they were formed up on the surface during the flood. All that red sandstone and the different stuff in there, that was all explained in here how it's made, and it was blown out in these fountains. And this is very important to understand. Hydro fountains is a real important concept.
Yep. All right, so let's get back to the scriptures here for just a little bit more. So basically, Korihor basically says, and this is verse 48, says, "Except you show me a sign, and I will not believe."
Right.
So Alma basically prays to the Lord. He says, "Thou shalt be struck dumb according to thy words." Says, "This I will give you for a sign." And so he's struck dumb, so he could not have utterance. Then in verse 52. And this, I want to touch on some interesting aspects here. So in verse 52 it says, "And Korihor put forth his hand and wrote, saying, I know that I am dumb, for I cannot speak. And I know that nothing save it were the power of God could bring this upon me. Yea, and I also always knew that there was a God." So he'd been lying the entire time.
And he tells us why, because an angel came to him, supposedly a good angel, but it was not.
"And behold, the devil has deceived me, for he appeared unto me in the form of an angel, and said unto me, Go and reclaim this people.
Yeah.
For they have all gone astray after an unknown God." Who was the unknown God? The traditionalists.
Yeah.
The traditions of the fathers, which came
Right.
down from Adam and Eve, and
Right.
then through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and so forth. Right?
And do we have professors today that are trying to do the same thing?
Well, we're going to talk about that here in just a second.
Okay.
So he said, and this angel said, "There is no God. Yea, and he taught me that I should say, and I have taught these words, and I have taught them." Why? "Because they were pleasing unto the carnal mind." What is a carnal mind, do you suppose?
It's not a spiritual mind.
It's one who's basically looking for naturalistic explanations for
right.
everything rather than recognizing the spiritual aspect of it.
It's the Moroni 10:5, the Holy Ghost. Yeah.
And he says, and I taught them even until I had much success, because a lot of people really want to have the carnal mind understanding. For this cause I withstood the truth even until I have brought this great curse upon me. And then he came clean, right? Basically said, I admit, I always knew there was a God. I was deceived by this angel, and so forth. So he basically backs up in it. And now it's interesting, though, how much damage had Korihor done to the people at this point in time?
A lot.
Well, so much damage that Alma decided it was important to take his words and proclaim them out to all the people and show them and shine the light on this Korihor.
Yeah.
And he says, he said, was it
56.
This is from verse 57. Now the knowledge of what had happened unto Korihor was immediately published throughout all the land. So when you find out that there is a Korihor teaching Antichrist stuff, it is basically his obligation to immediately call them out.
Yes.
And publish throughout all the land, yea, and a proclamation was sent forth by the chief judge to all the people in the land, declaring unto those who had believed in the words of Korihor that they must speedily repent.
Yeah.
Lest the same judgments would come unto them. It came to pass that they were all convinced of the wickedness of Korihor, therefore they were all converted again to the Lord, and this put an end to the iniquity after the manner of Korihor. But did it really?
Nope.
So this is an important question, because ultimately
Korihor was out of the picture, but
yeah, and this is true of all of Satan's followers. If you want to follow Satan, you're on a bad path, because guess what? Satan is never going to come to your rescue. He can't.
No.
Ultimately, he will always hang you out to dry, because he never really supports. He has no way to support the falsehoods that he is teaching the people.
No.
So what happens to Korihor? He's trodden down and killed.
Yeah. Well, he found out what the light was, and of course Lucifer can't go to the light. So once he accepted the light, that he was fooled, now he's on his own, and that's what happens every time.
So I wanted to bring up that some of the false doctrines. Then, if we just kind of do a quick little recap. Is first off, he's Antichrist. Second off, there's a vain hope in Christ. He's saying it's vain to have a hope in Christ. He says that the people, the traditionalists, yoke themselves to foolish things. He talked about that no one knows the future. He prophesies about foolish traditions, that these traditions handed down from the fathers they're just silly, right? In fact, he even calls them silly.
Lies. Yep.
He says you can't know things you can't see.
Yep.
He says there will be no atonement, because if there's no Christ, then there's no need for an atonement.
Yep.
In fact, if there's no God, there's no need for any of it.
Nope.
Because there's no
you
law.
die and you go. It's all over.
Okay. He says man fares according to his own strengths. He said the people are prospered by their own intellect, or they conquer through their own strength. He talked about how death was the end. When we die, that's it. There is no more. There's no afterlife. There was no preexistence. They talked about the ordinances and performances are foolish. So the ordinances that we do are foolish as well. Okay? And then this is all done to usurp power and authority and keep the people in ignorance and to bind them down and to glut themselves on this.
If you like this Come Follow Me supplemental study, click the like button and share it with your friends. You can also send your family and friends to bookofmormonevidence.org, which is a hub with all the links that you would like to the podcasts, to upcoming events, the store, the 400 answers to the Book of Mormon. For this podcast only, Dean has been very generous to give everyone 20% off. The promo code is UMFIRM. That's for Universal Model and Firm Foundation. All capitals, UMFIRM. Thanks, Dean. Also, don't forget, this summer you can have a spiritual boost every day by going to bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com.